we are back. Welcome to the Dish Pig, where we go on a journey of discovery in the food and beverage world. I'm your host, Nick Sherry. Well, we're heading into my favourite time of year. We're heading into holiday season, silly season, hearty season. I also think it's potato season. Spuds are really going to get a workout over the next couple of months with Thanksgiving and Christmas around the corner. I'm making some potato pavés this weekend. Pavé, I believe, is French for paver, like a brick. They look like little bricks. But it's basically thinly sliced potato, which you layer and bake in the oven. Mine are going to be baked in duck fat. Then you chill it, slice it, deep fry it. Fancy chips, really. Fancy fries. Anyway, that's my weekend. But my guest this week, they might have lost the language. They might have lost a lot of the culture, but they kept the food. These are the wise words of my guest, Hetal Vasavada, founder of the popular food blog Milk Cardamom, and author of the cookbook Milk and Cardamom, Spectacular Cakes, Custards and More, inspired by the flavours of India. She was a contestant on MasterChef Season 6, and her recipes are featured in Bon Appetit, Food and Wine, Washington Post, the New York Times, and many more. Just by coincidence, it was Diwali yesterday, the Festival of Lights that spiritually symbolises victory of light over darkness, good over evil, and knowledge over ignorance. I definitely got my fix of samosas. My wife was kind enough to bring some back from the Gurdwara. Thank you, Nina. Anyway, happy Diwali, everyone. Now let's jump in. Here we are, Hetal. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. Nice to see you. You're in San Francisco, right?
Yeah, right in the Bay Area.
Is that where you didn't grow up there though? Did you?
No.
Whereabouts did you grow up?
I grew up in New Jersey on the East Coast.
Okay.
Very different world than California.
Yeah. And when did you move out to San Francisco?
I moved out here in 2012.
2012.
So I'm like fully indoctrinated into the West Coast culture, and I could never go back now.
Yeah.
I'm too soft.
That's good. Now I usually kick things off by asking my guests what was the last thing they cooked for themselves.
So I'm working on a recipe for an article. So the last thing I made was a carrot cake.
Carrot cake, very nice.
Yeah,
very nice. Mine's super boring. It was a bowl of cornflakes for breakfast. It was nothing up to what you've been doing. But tell me, I mean, you've done a lot in the food world and kind of building your brand, which we'll get to. But tell me what it was like growing up and how you got into, finding your passion with cooking. Like where did it all begin?
Yeah. So growing up in New Jersey, my parents actually immigrated to America from India in the late 80s. But both my parents have farming backgrounds. So their families both owned farms in India. So food was always kind of in our culture, like the way I grew up. But like having fresh food was like a major importance. And I just thought like that's how everyone grew up.
Yeah.
In my head, I was like, oh yeah, every family has like a homemade meal every day and everyone's got a garden in their backyard of vegetables and produce. Like it didn't click for me that not everyone grows up this way until I was like maybe in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got to college and I met other Indians or Indian Americans and I'm like, wait, you didn't grow up this way either? Like I was like, oh no, my parents are like special hippies. But food was like very, very important. But the other thing is my parents sponsored a lot of their family members to come to America.
Mm-hmm.
So that meant my house was filled with like 10 to 14 people at any given moment.
Wow.
My dad has 6 brothers and 2 sisters. My mom's got 6 sisters and a brother. And they all at one point in their life lived in my house with my family. So it was dinner was like
Hectic.
Yeah, it was a production. I mean, you're trying to feed that many people, but you're also making dinner and lunch for the next day for most of the crew.
Yeah.
So all hands were needed on deck. Like everyone needed to be doing something, prepping vegetables, cutting things, making dough. Because every day we would have fresh rotli, which is the bread that we eat. So
Yeah.
Gujarati meal. You know how you have like meat, potato, like what is it? Meat, starch, and veg is like the typical American European plate. For Gujarati, it's rotli, which is the bread, the flat bread. Chak, which is like any vegetable that's cooked in spices, or meat. We're vegetarian, but meat can be considered a shak too. Rice and dal, like lentil soup.
Yep.
And we had that fresh every single day. Like it and you know how they have like the French brigade system where you have like your saucier and all that stuff. We had our auntie brigade system, which like you would start off with prepping vegetables. And if you were good enough, then you could graduate to like cooking them or making the dough for the rotli. And then maybe you graduate to actually making the rotli. Like there was a hierarchy and everyone had a role. And, it was just something I had to do. Like cooking was something we just had to do. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. And then it turned into a skill that was monetizable when I was in college because I'm the first person in my family to go to college, first person to really go past elementary school.
Wow.
To be honest. Yeah. My dad has a 3rd grade education. My mom has a 10th grade education. Wow. And when I was in college, they both got laid off from their company. And to pay for school, the only monetizable skill I had was to cook.
What were you studying in college at the time?
Biochemistry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was being a good Indian kid, and I was like, I'm going to do healthcare. I'm going to be a doctor.
It's funny you mention that because so my wife, she's Punjabi. Well, she's American Indian. Her parents immigrated in the 80s. Very similar. And the way that she described it to me, like speaking to relatives about what you do for a living, they narrowed it down to you're either you're medical or you're non-medical. That's it. So anything outside of medical, you just put in this box of non-medical. Yeah. But so you were on the medical track, but then this shift happens for food. So what how did that kind of continue?
So I started cooking and baking out of my dorm room, selling meals to like other students.
Yeah.
And then I worked at a pizza joint for a while, like doing their like 6 p.m. to like 2 a.m. shift and whatever I had to do, but cook, it was like another means to an end. And then once I got out of grad school, I did my master's degree in biomedical sciences. I at least had the right thought where I was like, yeah, med school ain't for me. Don't even do it, Hetal. But I entered the corporate world and I hated it so much. And I would come home and cook a meal or bake something to like make myself feel better about life.
Yeah.
And it just became something I kept relying on and going back to. And, being someone that never had financial stability, growing up and during college and grad school and stuff, I got really lucky. After I got married, my husband was like, seriously, you hate everything about your job, just quit. And I'm like, I can't just quit. I can't, because the idea of not making money, like it like gave me anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he like convinced me to quit and try out for MasterChef. And I went on MasterChef, cried a lot, baked a lot, cried even more, got yelled at by Gordon Ramsay. And came out the other end with like a newfound confidence in my skills and an idea that I can be in the cooking world or the food world without having to actually own a restaurant. Because like a lot of times people are like, oh, you work in food, oh, you must own a restaurant, or that's your goal to own a restaurant. But there's so much more you can do outside of owning a restaurant. You can be a food writer, a food photographer, a recipe developer. There's so many careers in the food industry that are not as stressful as owning a restaurant is.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So that is the direction I went. I came off, I started developing recipes for like startups here in the Bay, doing food photography, doing social media management and digital marketing stuff for like restaurants and whatnot. But I still like had my blog that I like kind of focused on, which I would just share recipes. And then the pandemic hit. I lost all my clients. And then I was like, I'm just going to see if I like put all the work, like all my learnings from social media, if I attach it to my social media, how would it go? And it just blew up in that year. It was kind of wild. And that on top of writing a cookbook that by like serious luck and opportunity did well. It all just kind of fell into place for me. And as weird as it sounds, like, how some people are like, oh, it's a lot of hard work, but it's also a lot of luck and like being at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Which is something you like literally can't plan for, you can't plan it. It's just, it happens or it doesn't happen. And I'm very lucky that it did happen for me.
And doing a lot of preparation, right? Like, like all those years of actually preparing for that moment. But what, I mean, just to backtrack a little bit, like, I'm sure that there must be hundreds, if not thousands of aspiring, cooks, chefs out there that, look, I mean, I love to cook. It's like you mentioned, it helps me zone out. It makes me focus on one particular thing. It makes me forget about a shitty day at work, forget about the world, and it's very therapeutic. But when you were at the stage you were at and you're like, look, I'm gonna audition for MasterChef, how confident were you in your skills? Like, were you just thinking, I'm just going to give this a go just for the fun of it? I don't have any idea where this is going to go. Or is it like, you know what, I reckon I've got a really good chance of getting on this show? Like, what were you thinking mentally at the time?
Very much like, well, I'm going to give it a go. If I get on, I get on. If I don't, I'm going to go back to healthcare.
Okay. Yeah.
I had zero confidence in my cooking skills because like your friends and family are always going to tell you your food tastes good. Like they're obligated.
Yeah.
And I've never like fed strangers before. And I was just like, I want to know how I compare to the other average home cooks like me.
Yeah.
Am I good? Am I better? I mean, I know there's a huge component of getting on the show is obviously personality, being comfortable in front of a camera and all that fun stuff that goes with it, with like reality TV. But I wanted to know, like, how do I compare cooking wise to other people that are of, I would say, the same caliber as me? And I was so surprised at how far I made it. I was every single time.
You finished you finished sixth, right, in that season?
Yeah.
And that's out. How many do they have at the start of the season? It was like 20. Like
they had 40.
Oh, it starts with 40. Wow. It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
I know my year they said like I think close to 40,000 people applied. I mean, in San Francisco alone, there's like 2,000 or 3,000 that came to the like open call.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this is wild.
What do you actually have to do to like what's involved in your audition?
Okay, so you have this like crazy form that you have to fill out where like, they want your sob story if you have one. They want to know like everything about you because they're going to obviously take advantage of all the information that you put down on there and then like throw it at you in a challenge.
Yeah.
So put all that in there, then you have to do an open call. So the open call, you just line up. They bring you in like 20 at a time. You have to have a dish that you can plate in 3 minutes. Some poor guy brought like tacos, but like didn't cut the veggies that were going to go in the taco. So like in 3 minutes, tried to do that. Someone bought a toaster with them. I was like, what do you plan on doing in 3 minutes with a toaster?
Put the bread in and then just sitting there waiting for the,
I was like so confused, but
so you have you have all your, it's like all your prep like is with you and you have to bring it in.
Yeah. Quick pro tip, don't make mushroom soup because after a while it turns gray and does not look good and appetizing.
Yeah, that would look good.
Yeah, so they had like 2 judges. There were people from like, I want to say they were from Top Chef. They looked familiar.
Uh-huh.
One tried 10, the other tried 10. They took their little notes, asked you like questions to kind of freak you out. I had made like a white chocolate mousse tart with the pistachio crust. Okay. So they were like, how'd you make the mousse? And, all that kind of technical questions. And then they'll ask the people they like to stick around and they make you go in front of the casting directors. And then they ask you like, why MasterChef and like, why food, etc. And then if they liked you from there, you moved on to a video interview to see if you're like awkward in front of the camera.
Yeah.
That was one day, and this is like in September. And then 2 months later, they're like, congratulations, you made the top 500. And then like a month later, congratulations, you're in the top 100. We're going to fly you down to LA. So they bring like the top 100 down to LA. They take your phone the moment you get there, put you in a hotel room with some stranger that you don't know. And over the course of a week, they bring you like in groups to the studios and just kind of like make you cook and I guess see how you are. They'll be like, you have an hour, make whatever you want with whatever is here. And from there, they the last day they locked us all in our rooms and they were just basically going around like, don't come out until we knock on your door. So like, of course, all of us are like ear to the door, looking through the eye hole, trying to see like who's getting called. And then finally my door got knocked on and they brought us to a room and they're like, you've made it.
Wow.
And they brought us to a brand new like hotel room and we started filming and it was wild. There's 3 months of filming. It's a long.
It's an intense process. I mean, to get on the show to begin with, but
yeah.
And then
just to get on.
Yeah. And then 3 months of shooting.
Yeah. So 3 months of shooting, you're sequestered. So you have no phone. You can't talk to anyone. You get 1 10-minute phone call a week. You can't leave the hotel. You can't leave the studios. You have to be with a wrangler, which is basically like a babysitter that takes you like everywhere. Even within the studio, if you have to go to the bathroom, the wrangler takes you to the bathroom.
Wow.
So, you're filming upwards of 12 to 14 hours a day.
So you're just completely immersed in it.
Yeah. It's all you're in. That's why everyone like cries at the drop of a hat because like you're already emotionally wrecked. So, it makes for good TV, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I would prefer to have more like the British style of reality TV, like Great American, Great British Bake Off, their version of MasterChef. But
I think that there's something about the Great British Bake Off that's like it's just so kind of friendly and like pleasant and like there's always a cutaway to like a little bird flying through where the tent is on the lawn and they put them under a tree for their interview at the end of the day and that was one of the shows that my wife and I binge watched during like peak COVID season.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish, but American TV, it's all about the drama and the fighting. Yeah, it was an experience for sure.
And then like once you left the show, once you were booted off, unfortunately. What was what was going through your head? Like, was that just a massive confidence builder, and you kind of really knew what was going to come next?
I was first very wrecked.
Like first get
I
some sleep.
I literally, I think I cried for like a good 3 weeks. And then I like didn't cook for like a good 2, 3 months because I
Oh
had a lot of
wow.
anxiety around it. I had dreams of Gordon Ramsay yelling at me,
Holy
like
shit.
full on dreams and nightmares. So like, and the thing is, it's not like uncommon. A lot of contestants when they come off the show have like a lot of anxiety because you're going from this like little bubble to being out in the world again.
Yeah.
And things right when you're kicked off, nothing's been announced. People don't know you're on the show.
Uh-huh.
Like they haven't announced that the premiere, nothing yet, you know? Um, so you have a couple months to yourself where like, you're just kind of like anxious, you know? And the moment it was announced and that like I was on the cast, that's when it started feeling a little bit better because like I started getting emails, you know, from companies. I could talk to companies, be like, oh, by the way, I'm on this season of MasterChef, da 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 da.
Yeah.
But the anxiety of like, you know, I don't know how they're going to portray me.
That's, I mean, yeah, like, I mean, like you're talking about, like, you know, trying to extract all that drama in the edit room. It's,
Yeah.
I mean, you feel like you're kind of signing your life away when you go on the show, right?
Oh yeah. The contracts say that they can edit you to make you look like false impressions or be defamatory.
Oh God.
The contracts are insanity for these type of reality shows.
Yeah.
Insanity. But yeah, after it was announced, and I was lucky. I mean, the way they edited me is actually kind of like how I am. Just add a little bit more cursing and a little bit more confrontation, and it's me. There's really like nothing else to. I mean, the clothing and that kind of stuff, not so me. I'm not like the long hair, purple, like every once in a while, but not all the time.
Okay.
But they definitely edited me to be like a model minority.
Uh-huh.
And I did get into fights. I did curse a lot, but a lot of that was edited out completely. Which, you know what? I'm like, that's fine. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I'll take this edit, you know? I'll take that edit. But because of that, you know, I was able to kind of start working with, you know, meal kit companies. So that's what was blowing up when I was on the show 6 years ago.
Oh, okay.
You know, Blue Apron and Sunbasket and all those guys.
Yeah.
So I started doing recipe writing for them. And that really built my confidence because what they would do is like I would work with one and then they would refer me to someone else. And I started getting a lot of my work by word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And it just like boosted my confidence even more. But the thing is, like, in order to be a chef, you have to have a sort of ego to be like, you should eat my food and pay this much for it, you know? So it definitely helped build that a little bit for me.
You definitely needed. And then, I mean, so your blog, Milk and Cardamom, did you have that was going before you were on MasterChef?
Yeah.
So that was just something that was just a side hustle, bit of fun. And at what point did that start to really blow up and turn into your first book?
So I actually knew I wanted to write a book for a very long time. My MasterChef contract prevented me from doing so for 3 years post show.
Right.
So as soon as my contract ended, I got that book signed and pretty much out there.
Yeah.
My contract ended 2018 and I published it in 2019.
Got it.
So it had been something I wanted to do for a very long time. I didn't know it would speak to so many people the way it did. I get so many messages from people that are like, oh my gosh, like these are the flavors of my childhood.
Uh-huh.
You know, a lot of Indian Americans that had like shared experiences that I had, which is like going to Patel Brothers and like eating kulfi while your mom sits and like picks tindora and like other vegetables and talking to all the aunties and, you know, like the similar experiences. And the other thing is there was a lot of mixed families that were like, you know what, this book has been really great. Like I can bake it and my parents know like what the dessert is. But then like, my significant other who isn't Indian also feels like this is something familiar to them. Like it's a cake or a cookie or whatever it may be. And it was really, really like interesting to see how people related to these sweets because desserts in Indian culture is such a big deal.
Yeah. It's the one thing that I've actually managed to cook for my in-laws, which was kheer.
Yes, rice pudding.
Yeah.
It was invented by Indians. It was through my research for my book.
That's where it originated.
In India, yeah. And then it made its way towards Europe. It was one of the very few desserts in my cookbook when I was doing research that showed the origins being in India.
Wow. There you go. I did not know that.
Yeah. So all the folks eating rice pudding, it's because someone from India came through.
The first time I actually had it was my wife took me to the Gurdwara we were in Hollywood at the time. And, she was, like, I think you should come and, see what it's all about. And, you can sit down and you can have the meal afterwards. Langar.
Oh, yeah, langar.
And then I think, that they were serving some for dessert there. And I tasted it. I'm like, this is really, really good. On that same visit, though, I will say my chappals, my flip-flops, because you have to take them off before you go into the Gurdwara. Someone stole them, and I tell you, there was probably 6 people in the Gurdwara this day. It was like it was the middle of the day on like a Wednesday, and I was telling the in-laws this, and they're like, oh, they probably just got mixed up with someone else. And like there was like 6 people inside. Like someone has come in off the street and they've taken my chappals, but I kind of took it as a sign that I wasn't allowed to leave the Gurdwara and I'm going to be in this family for the rest of my life. And they were right. Like, I'm now, we are now married. And, but yeah, that was I'm kind of sidetracking to my first experience with kheer. But I mean,
so you gotta have mandir or Gurudwara shoes. I always brought my like ugliest, messed up looking shoes with me, so no one took them.
That's actually it's good you mentioned that because my wife's cousin tells a story about how they were at, I think it was like a wedding or something, so like it was packed, and she came out after the ceremony to get her shoes and couldn't find them, and then she looks over and there's like this old auntie walking towards her coming out of the bathroom, and she looks at the shoes and is like, oh no, they're my shoes. And yeah, I think she felt a bit gross afterwards, but that's a good tip. That's a good tip for the future. Just take the shittiest pair of shoes you have, and nothing will go wrong. Talking about Indian food in general, look, I'm like a white guy looking in, but it seems like it's a very misunderstood cuisine. Like I know that recently there was a food critic like for the Washington Post came out and basically said that curry is just one ingredient or something, and
one spice.
One spice. There you go, and that caused a lot of backlash. But I mean, talk me through your experience of trying to put Indian food on a different level, and trying to educate people about how different it is across different parts of the of the country and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think that the thing to me that I always found funny is people can understand that Italy has different food based on where you are in Italy, right? Like Tuscan versus like, Northern Italy, like the food is so different. They can comprehend that. They can comprehend that China, depending on the province and the region and district, the food can be different, right? Szechuan, Hunan, etc.
Yeah.
But the idea that Indian food is not just one thing, aka like tandoori and chicken, makhni, and all that kind of stuff. And like, you have to understand how different. I mean, even in the US, you think about barbecue from state to state.
Yeah.
It is wildly different.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing is for Indian food. I don't understand how like that hasn't been comprehended yet. But the thing is, I think we're in a day and age now where there's a lot more you're seeing a lot more Indian faces in the food world.
Uh-huh.
You know, you got Priya Krishna, Sonia Chopra, Khushbu Shah, Tejal Rao, Rachel Gurjar, like on Bon Appetit, New York Times, Food and Wine, really trying to make sure people are educated in what Indian food is and what it isn't.
Uh-huh.
And how different it is, like the stuff you're seeing at your typical restaurants. Yes, that's a type of Indian food, but that's not encompassing everything that it could be. For me, I've been really, trying to show Gujarati food. So like during my time on MasterChef, I'd cook Gujarati dishes. I made khichdi, which is now like this like Ayurvedic, like, goopy meal that you see like people trying to pass it on. This is Ayurvedic healing rice porridge. And I'm like, it's khichdi. You eat it when your mom doesn't feel like cooking.
Yeah.
But like they're starting to see that it's more than just creamy sauces. And even then, that's Mughalai food. That is when the Mughals came into India and they made those rich dishes for the most part, which got inseminated throughout India. But like Gharka Khana or like home food is so different than what you would get in a restaurant. Like no one eats like that every day.
Because that's where and is that where like the whole British Indian food kind of stems from as well, and that's probably the most, I guess, that's what's been exported so much, and people I guess just gravitate to that's Indian food, but it's far different. It's actually it's funny, I mean, like when it comes to home cooked Indian food compared to eating out at a restaurant. Even I'm starting to notice, like I'm so lucky when I get to go home to like the in-laws because like every Sunday my mother-in-law will make aloo branta and it's like the most delicious thing ever. And I went, we were with some family friends of theirs and someone else had made like their variation of aloo branta, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's just not the same as my as my mother-in-law's. Like there's something about kind of gravitating towards back, what you grew up with and what you're used to.
Yeah. I mean, there's a clear difference in, I think, Asian cooking versus, I would say, American European, right? There's no cookbook. You know how there were books and instructions and manuals made for French cooking, right?
Yeah.
Where like, this is how you do this, and that is the way it is to be done, and this is how you define a boeuf bourguignon, and like you have to do it this way. There was no standard for Indian food for like a certain dish. If you live in this region and you like things spicy, you're going to add extra chilies. And the thing is, it's also orally passed down, and obviously like practically like tangibly, like you teach your kid how to make the dishes.
Yeah.
There's no written. It's very rare that I see, my friends that have like recipes that their grandmothers wrote down. I'm like, yeah, I don't have that. No one wrote anything down. It's very rare that you have like passed down generational recipes like that. Like my grandmother made things a certain way, and then my mom, came to America and then changed out ingredients based on what was available to her, and then she taught me that. Yeah. So it just changes. So much, and it evolves, which is why you have like, one aloo paratha tastes so different from the aloo paratha. But I think that's like the beauty, right?
Yeah,
that's the beauty, I think, of Indian food.
It makes sense because do you find that in the recipes that you've been developing and in your book as well, like is there anything that's super traditional that has been passed down to you that you've made sure, okay, I need to get this in print. Like this isn't my twist on it. It's like, I need to get this solidified so it's going to be accessible years and years from now.
Oh yeah. I mean, in my cookbook, I have a recipe for sukri, which is, it's an Indian dessert. It's it's more commonly found in Gujarat. But it's basically like toasted whole wheat, ghee, ground up nuts, and cardamom, and a little bit of jaggery. And you press it into a pan, and it's almost like granola bars type of, but like really, really fine and meshed, like held together with ghee, essentially.
Okay.
But my mom would make it for me ever since I was a little kid. I mean, she would pack it in my lunch as like the sweet thing. And I was like, I gotta keep this. And my grandma would make it for me. And I'm like, I can't mess with this. I gotta put the traditional recipe. I did the same thing with like churmaki laddu, laddu, like all the stuff that I remember that would go at the altar at the temple.
Uh-huh.
Like the laddus and stuff, I kept pretty traditional. Because those are definite, like they're flavors that I just didn't want to mess with, and techniques I didn't want to mess with because they're, things that my mom learned from her grandmother.
Yeah. With your, with your book and your blog and everything, like it's all about education and trying to, spread this word of the kind of food you're cooking. What do you see as some of your goals moving forward to kind of keep this momentum going?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would love to write a Gujarati cookbook that focuses on Kachori Gujarati food. So the thing is, even within Gujarat, there's regional food. You have Surat, right? Surti food. You have Gujarati Muslim food because they meet. There's Kachori food, which is where I'm from, which is more like village food.
Okay.
Kutch food, which is northern in the deserts. But I'd love to just share the food I grew up from the village, because what's happening right now is a lot of these villages, their kids are going to school and they're not coming back. And the art of that cooking is being lost.
Right.
On top of that, you are seeing more and more access to Western foods in India. People going out to eat at KFC instead of going to like the local chaat stall. The chaat stalls have now turned into like pasta stalls, So like a lot of these dishes, like they're globalizing.
Yeah.
And when that happens, a lot of times you lose a lot of the traditional ancestral dishes. So I want to like kind of highlight those. I'd love to do like a full Guju cookbook from like A to Z with everything, drinks, pickles, all the shacks, all the rotlets, all the things I basically made growing up in my mom's kitchen with all the aunties,
Yeah.
And the reason is because, like, I think a lot of Indian Americans like me, we like measurements, and our mothers never give us measurements. They're like, a knuckle's worth of ginger and a fist of rice. And, I'm like, but your fist and my fists are very different sizes. So I think having those standardized recipes would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also something for my kid, because like I know my Indianness is diluted from my mother's Indianness, right? Growing up in America.
Uh-huh.
And my daughter's Indianness is going to be further diluted from my Indianness.
Yeah.
And even if you look at places where Indians were emigrated to or were brought to by the British, they might have lost the language. They might have lost, a lot of the culture, but they kept the food.
Yeah.
And I think I would love to be able to keep that alive for my daughter, to be able to have a book to go back to and be like, oh, these are the things that like my grandmother and my mom grew up eating. And I can make this for myself and my kids in the future to remind them, like, it's the easiest way to like include your culture. And I think I like would love to be able to continue sharing that. And just kind of educating people on, Indian food is not like cream laden, saucy dishes.
Yeah.
And
it's not, it's not always super spicy as well, right? Like
no.
I think that's like my dad for some reason hates Indian food, but I don't know why, but I think it has something to do with, it's always going to be spicy, but it's just, although when I've been back to the in-laws, I think some of the spicy dishes, I think they're purposely holding out on me. I think they're kind of like, oh no, he won't be able to handle it. I'm like, no, please, put more in.
And you know what the funny thing is? Like, I can't handle heat. I am not a spicy eater. So I always like have to put in my recipes like as much as you can handle, because I know I can't handle all that much. And my husband definitely can't handle any, and he grew up in Alabama. He's Indian too, but
Yeah.
like I can't handle the heat. Neither can my mother. So I grew up the opposite. I have friends that like have to have a whole jalapeno on the side of their meal to like make it taste good.
Just take like one bite of the meal and then a bite of the jalapeno. Tell me a bit about so Milk and Cardamom, your blog. It's really developed into like, you know, it's not just about, you know, here's a new recipe. I mean, you've put on like different kind of travel guides. I mean, I remember looking at one about like taking the family camping. Like, how do you talk me through how that has grown and where that inspiration comes from?
So growing up, I didn't really travel a lot, being, my family didn't make a lot of money. But one of the things I did when I started making money was traveling.
Uh-huh.
And with my daughter, we started traveling with her pretty much immediately. We took her to Yosemite when she was like a month old. And then at 3 months, we left for like a 6-month round the world trip with her. And the way we funded it is I worked for a lot of hotels and created menus for them. And then in turn, I got to stay at the hotel for free.
Traveling around the world, you were developing recipes and staying in the hotels for free, which is genius, by the way.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's something that you were channeling into the blog as well.
Yeah, so that was all going into the blog, and then for me as a chef, I need inspiration, and a lot of my inspiration comes from going out and eating and experiencing new foods and different techniques, and traveling just kind of goes hand in hand with that. This summer, I did a 2.5-month road trip with my daughter and my husband, and we drove pretty much the perimeter of the United States.
Wow.
And I did pop-ups along the way. I did a pop-up in Lexington, New York, Philly, all over the place, and just kind of tried all the food I possibly could. I would ask my followers for recommendations. Where should I go eat? What do you guys think? Share, all the different things I ate. Being vegetarian, that also like gets people excited because they're like, oh, you're vegetarian, so can you tell us where's a good vegetarian place to go eat?
Yeah.
So it all just kind of went hand in hand. But the thing is, during the pandemic, pre-pandemic, I always kept everything to food on my blog. It was just food. Sometimes I do travel stuff because people would ask like, oh, do you have an itinerary for this, that, the other? And it was just easier for me to have a place to send them to. But when the pandemic hit, I mean, they got a good inside look at my life. I mean, root Nilara home every day. Then, they are meeting my family, learning what my personal life is like, what my home life is like. And a part of that is traveling. And then they get questions about like, oh, well, where do you camp? How do you camp? What do you need to camp? What are some good hiking spots for little kids? And it just kind of naturally grew that direction.
Yeah.
As I opened up my personal life to, I guess, social media, because normally I just kept it like hands and pans, never showed my face if I didn't have to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's now become more like a place and a community that people come, they want to see my travels. They want to see what I'm cooking. They want to, hang out.
Yeah. Speaking of your social media, I saw something you wrote, I think it was just yesterday actually, and we kind of touched on this at the very beginning, but it really resonated because you said that I think the moment I realized I was in love with baking was when I realized I started turning to it for help with anxiety and stress. It brought me zen. I just zone out and go through the motions, and I had just such a sense of inner peace. That's like the perfect description of, what baking and cooking should really feel like, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the main thing that you want to kind of pass on to other people as well? Because, I mean, at the same time, I have these feelings, but then if I screw something up, it kind of turns into another feeling as well.
I totally can understand that. I like when I teach my classes, I always start off with like, I know a lot of people find baking to be very stressful and they panic and they like are like overthinking it. I'm like, let it go and just go with the flow. It's all right. Whatever happens at the end, it's still going to taste good. Even if it doesn't look perfect, it doesn't matter. The matter is the taste. And then as you practice, as you bake more, the looks and all that will also, change.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, it there's something so satisfying knowing that like if you use the exact amount of ingredients and follow the technique to a T, the final result will always be the same.
Mm-hmm.
There's no variables. And I guess that speaks to like the science brain in me where like facts are facts, you know?
Yeah.
I like definitive things. So like I like that aspect of it. But also the thing is you have to be in the zone. You cannot think about other things. You cannot zone out and like not be present when you're doing these things because you'll mess up the recipe.
Yeah.
You have to focus. You can only think about the present and what the task is at hand, and that's that. And my brain's one of those brains, like when I go to bed and I turn off the lights, my brain's like, you have to do this tomorrow. You have to do this tomorrow. Did you order this? Did you do that? Did you talk to this person? Do you have to email this person back? And it doesn't turn off. And the only time it does turn off is like when I'm cooking and baking.
Yeah.
And I think for some people, they see it as like something very like that brings them anxiety. And I'd love to teach people that like it shouldn't bring you anxiety. If it does, try following just recipes, websites that you fully trust and go with that and start from there. And then as you practice, as you cook more, you'll learn tips and tricks and you'll figure things out and you'll be able to go more off the cuff per se.
And would you, I mean, looking back on what everything that you've accomplished to today, like would you do anything differently? What kind of advice would you give to someone that is, an aspiring cook or chef or someone that wants to, share their, childhood upbringing when it comes to like their connection with food? Like what would you want to tell people?
I would tell people, you don't even need to have a blog. You can nowadays in the world of social media, you can start on TikTok, Instagram, and just start sharing. But beyond just sharing your stuff, look at what your community is sharing or the community you want to be a part of is sharing. Interact with them, build relationships, talk to them. It's like a lot of people see it as like competition.
Right.
Like there can only be one Indian blogger, and I'm like, not true. I'm guaranteed the same people who follow me probably follow all the other Indian bloggers. Like you can share followers. But build a community, build like a space where you're open to learning things. And also the thing is when you first get started, a lot of people will start asking for recipes for things that might not be in your wheelhouse. Like I get asked for like dosa recipes all the time and, South Indian food all the time. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not South Indian.
Right.
I didn't grow up with that.
Yeah.
Be open to give people a seat at the table. Say, I don't do that, but here's a recipe from this blogger who I think is awesome. That's South Indian.
Yeah.
Check out her stuff. Like you don't need to do everything. Do your niche and like stick to it.
Yeah.
You don't need to go beyond your niche. And instead give them references, send them to other people, because then it gets a little too wild.
Well, this has been great to talk to you. I really appreciate you sparing your time and learning more about you and your history and your connection with the food you've been cooking. And yeah, I mean, we can't wait to see what's coming next. Are you working on your next book yet?
I am. I have a Diwali ebook that's going to be coming out. I did one last year, so I'm doing another one this year, which will be 10 new Diwali desserts, fusion desserts.
Yeah.
And yeah, still writing, and I have a semi-homemade dessert series coming out soon as well. So
Awesome.
that'll be on Instagram. But yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much again, and all the best.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.